You're moving fast through the brush, chasing something you can't afford to lose. Your foot catches a root you never saw. And before you even understand what happened, your leg is bent in a direction legs aren't supposed to bend. Out here, that's not an injury. That's a countdown. You can't walk, you can't hunt, you can't run from anything that finds you, and the nearest help is however far your voice can carry. Today, a broken leg is an afternoon. You get an x-ray. A doctor sets it in about 10 minutes under anesthesia you don't even feel. You go home in a cast, maybe on crutches, mildly annoyed that you'll miss a few weeks at the gym. Someone brings you food. Someone drives you places. Society just quietly absorbs the fact that one of its members currently can't function, and nothing about your survival is actually in question. 50,000 years ago, none of that existed. No x-ray, no anesthesia, no cast, no car to drive you anywhere, even if one had existed. A broken bone wasn't a medical event. It was a full system failure, and it attacked you from 4 directions at once. The first one is the most obvious. You simply can't move. Not walk, not run, not climb, not carry. And in a world where movement is survival, that alone should be a death sentence. You can't chase food. You can't flee a predator. You can't even get yourself to water if the camp moves on without you. The second one is quieter, and it's the one that actually killed the most people. Infection, a broken bone doesn't always stay under the skin. Sometimes it tears through it. And once bone is exposed to dirt, bacteria, insects, there is nothing in the ancient toolkit that can stop what comes next. No antibiotics, no sterile wrap, just a wound that either closes on its own or slowly poisons the whole body from the inside. The third is pain and shock. A major fracture floods the body with a kind of trauma modern medicine treats as an emergency in itself. Untreated shock alone, the drop in blood pressure, the disorientation, the risk of the heart simply struggling to keep up, could kill a person in the first few hours, long before infection or hunger ever became the problem. And the fourth threat isn't physical at all. It's social math. A hunter-gatherer group survives by everyone contributing. Hunting, gathering, carrying, defending. A person who suddenly can't do any of that isn't just injured. They're now a mouth to feed with nothing coming back the other way. In the coldest version of survival logic, that person becomes a liability the group has to decide whether to carry. So the real question isn't just how did the bone heal, it's how did a person survive 4 separate threats stacked on top of each other at the exact moment they were least equipped to fight any of them. And it's worth pausing on how rare that actually is in nature. Look at other animals. A wolf with a badly broken leg doesn't recover. It falls behind the pack, can't keep pace with a hunt, and within days it's either dead from starvation or picked off by something faster. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, show the same pattern. Researchers who study wild chimp populations have documented that a severe limb fracture is very often a slow death sentence because the group doesn't stop to wait, and an injured chimp can't keep up on its own. In the animal kingdom, broken bones are usually the end of the story. Humans are one of the only species on Earth where that isn't automatically true. And figuring out why takes us straight into what ancient humans actually did. Let's start with the bone itself, because here's something that surprises people. Bone is actually good at healing. Left alone, in the right position, a fracture will knit itself back together over a period of months, laying down new tissue across the break the same way a scar forms on skin. The problem was never whether the bone could heal. The problem was keeping it still long enough and straight enough for that healing to happen correctly. This is where splinting comes in. We don't have many direct fossilized splints because the materials used for them, wood, bark, hide, plant fiber, don't survive tens of thousands of years the way bone does. But we don't need the splint itself to know it existed. We can see the result. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons have found healed fractures that sit in near-perfect alignment, the kind of clean, straight healing that essentially never happens if a bone is simply left loose to mend on its own. A badly set or unset fracture heals crooked, shortened, twisted. A well-set one heals close to its original shape. And across multiple ancient populations, researchers keep finding the second kind far more often than pure chance would predict. That means someone knew what they were doing. Someone pulled the limb back into alignment, likely using steady traction, the kind of technique still used in emergency medicine today. Someone packed something rigid alongside it, a straight branch, a bundle of reeds, a strip of stiff hide, and bound it tightly enough to hold the bone still through weeks of healing. This wasn't guesswork. Ethnographic records from more recent hunter-gatherer societies, groups Groups living without modern medicine well into the last few centuries describe exactly this process. Bark splints lined with soft plant material, bound with sinew or twisted fiber, checked and retightened as swelling changed. The techniques these more recent groups used almost certainly weren't invented from scratch, they were inherited, passed down the same way firemaking and tool-making were, generation to generation, because the alternative was a group member who simply never walked again or didn't survive at all. And the timing mattered as much as the technique. A fresh fracture swells fast, sometimes within the hour, which means whoever was doing the splinting had to act quickly before the limb ballooned and made proper alignment impossible. Too loose, and the bone shifts as it heals, locking in a permanent deformity. Too tight, and you cut off circulation entirely, turning a broken leg into a dead one. Getting it right required someone who had done this before, or at least had watched it done, which tells you something else. This almost certainly wasn't the first broken bone that Camp had ever dealt with. Then there's the pain. And this is where the story gets genuinely surprising, because it's not guesswork either. Researchers examining ancient dental plaque, the hardened tartar that builds up on teeth over a lifetime, have found microscopic traces of plant compounds trapped inside it. At more than one Neanderthal site, that plaque contains chemical signatures matching poplar bark, a natural source of salicin, the same compound your body converts into the active ingredient in aspirin. It also shows traces of yarrow and chamomile, plants with no real nutritional value, but well known in later herbal medicine for reducing inflammation and easing pain. Think about what that means. Someone was chewing on bark that tastes bitter and offers no calories for a reason that had nothing to do with hunger. They knew, likely through generations of trial and accumulated memory, that specific plants took the edge off specific kinds of suffering. A broken bone throbbing for weeks isn't just uncomfortable. It's exhausting in a way that wears a person down mentally as much as physically. Anything that dulled that pain even slightly bought the injured person and the group caring for them precious reserves of patience and strength. Wound care mattered just as much. If the skin broke along with the bone, the injury became a race against infection. And ancient humans clearly understood, even without knowing why, that certain plants seemed to help. Traces of what researchers believe were medicinal poultices, plant material pressed directly onto wounds, show up in the archaeological and ethnographic record together. Some of those plants we now know actually do have antimicrobial properties. They didn't have the word for bacteria, they just had generations of noticing that some wounds treated a certain way healed, and some treated a different way didn't. There's also a simpler kind of wound care that leaves no chemical trace at all, just keeping a wound clean, dry, and covered, changing whatever dressing was used as it soiled. It sounds almost too basic to matter, but modern medicine will tell you that simple, consistent wound hygiene is still one of the single biggest factors in whether an open injury heals or turns septic. Someone doing that faithfully, day after day, for weeks on end, without knowing the science behind why it worked, was still doing the single most important thing available to them. But none of this, the splint, the plant medicine, the wound care, none of it explains the fourth threat, the social math, because a splinted leg still can't hunt. A dulled pain still can't gather food. Someone with a broken femur is out of commission for months, sometimes longer, and during that entire stretch, they contribute nothing to a group that needs every set of hands it has just to survive the next season. And this is where the archaeological record hands us one of the most quietly powerful facts in all of human prehistory. We have skeletons, ancient ones, tens of thousands of years old, showing catastrophic injuries that should have been immediately fatal or permanently disabling. Shattered limbs, fractures that healed badly deformed, meaning the person kept living on a leg that no longer worked properly. And in some of the most striking cases, individuals who show signs of blindness, paralysis, or the loss of a limb entirely, who nonetheless lived for years afterward. A person who can't see out of one eye, can't fully use an arm, and walks with a fracture that healed at the wrong angle, doesn't survive years in the wild on their own. Not without help. Not without someone else bringing them food when they couldn't hunt, protecting them when they couldn't run, checking on a healing wound they couldn't reach themselves. The bones don't just tell us that a fracture healed. They tell us that an entire group decided, apparently without hesitation, that this person was still worth keeping alive. That's the part that should stop you. We tend to imagine early humans as ruthlessly practical, cutting losses, moving on, survival of the fittest in its coldest possible sense. And yet here's a skeleton that says otherwise. Someone who could give nothing back for months, sometimes years, was fed anyway. Protected anyway. Kept warm, kept clean, kept alive. By people who had every practical reason not to bother and did it regardless. Think about what that actually cost the group. Every strip of dried meat handed to someone who couldn't hunt was meat that wasn't stockpiled for winter. Every hour spent checking a wound or repositioning a splint was an hour not spent gathering, not spent scouting, not spent resting. In a world already running on a thin margin, caring for someone who couldn't contribute wasn't a small gesture. It was a genuine sacrifice, paid by everyone else in the group, every single day for as long as the healing took. And they paid it anyway. So when you put the whole picture together, a broken bone in the ancient world wasn't survived by one invention. It was survived by a stack of them, layered on top of each other. Someone figured out how to pull a limb straight and hold it there. Someone figured out which bark took the edge off the pain. Someone figured out which plants kept a wound from turning fatal. And underneath all of that, someone made the decision, over and over, generation after generation, that a person who couldn't contribute was still worth carrying. The bone healed because biology does that on its own, given enough stillness and enough time. But the person survived long enough to let it happen, because other people chose to make that time possible. And now look at you. A broken bone barely registers as a crisis anymore. You get a scan, a cast, a follow-up appointment, you're mildly inconvenienced for 6 weeks, and then you're back to normal, having never once had to wonder whether the people around you would still bring you food if you stopped being useful. That question, whether you're worth keeping alive when you can't contribute, used to be answered fresh every single time someone fell wrong. Today you'll probably never have to find out. If stories like this one, the quiet overlooked ways our ancestors solved impossible problems, are the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. There's a whole history of human survival most people never learn, and that's exactly what this channel is.